When I was 8 years old, our family lived in the middle of nowhere. Literally, the nearest town was a 30-minute drive away. Our house was an old building surrounded by dense forest. Living there had its advantages, such as the tranquility and direct contact with nature. But there was also a sense of isolation that was sometimes disturbing. The scariest stories I read on the internet didn't come close to the feeling of loneliness that this place evoked. My name is Caleb, and one night I was sitting on the porch, gazing at the starry sky. My father had gone out to get firewood, and my mother was inside tending to my younger brother, James. It was a quiet night until our guard dog, Max, started barking frenetically. The sound was so intense and desperate that it made me jump out of my chair. I ran to see what was happening and found Max with his tail between his legs, barking aggressively into the darkness. At first, I thought it might be a fox or some other wild animal. But there was something strange about Max's behavior. He was a large and brave German shepherd, but that night he seemed truly scared. I followed his gaze and saw, at the edge of the road, a figure that left me paralyzed. At first glance, it looked like a dog, but there was something deeply wrong with it. The dog had no hair, and it moved in a strange way, as if it were a human trying to walk on all fours. Its posture was bizarre, with the rear end higher than its head. And its eyes were human. They stared at me with an intensity I had never seen before. Fear gripped me, and for a few seconds, I was unable to move or shout. That creature just stood there, staring at me, and I could feel its penetrating gaze. Suddenly, it started running at an incredible speed. It was too fast to be human, especially moving in that manner. Max continued barking but didn't dare to chase the creature. I wanted to run inside and tell my mother what I had seen, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. That sight seemed like something straight out of the scary stories people shared online. But this was real, right in front of me. When I finally managed to move, I ran inside and locked the door. I told my mother what I had seen, but she tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just my imagination. But I knew what I had seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those human eyes staring at me. It was the beginning of a series of events that would turn my childhood into a nightmare. The rest of that night was a blur of anxiety and fear. I lay in my bed listening to every sound the house made. The scariest stories I had read online seemed harmless compared to the terror I felt at that moment. James, in the crib next to me, slept peacefully, unaware of what I had witnessed. I wondered if I should tell him or spare him the fear. In the early hours of the morning, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a scratching noise at the window. My heart started racing. I slowly got up, trying not to make a sound, and went to the window. As I pulled the curtain, I saw claw marks on the glass. There was no sign of the creature, but the marks were fresh. I ran to wake up my parents, but my father was out, and my mother, tired, just mumbled that it was probably a branch scratching the window. The next morning, I told my father about the marks on the window. He took me seriously because he trusted my observation skills. We decided to investigate together. The day was clear, and the sunlight seemed to dispel some of the fear. When we reached the window, he saw the marks and furrowed his brow. "This isn't the work of a branch, Caleb. Something was here last night," he said, concern evident in his voice. We decided to walk around the property to look for more signs. We found strange footprints in the soil, resembling an animal's but with a shape we couldn't identify. The footprints led into the forest. My father hesitated, but we decided to follow them. Max was by our side, his fur bristling and his gaze alert. He didn't bark but sniffed the ground and growled softly. As we followed the footprints, the weather changed. The once clear sky turned cloudy, and the cold wind cut through our skin. The forest seemed denser, as if it were closing in on us. We reached a clearing where the footprints disappeared. There was a sense of emptiness there, as if something had been ripped away. My father looked around, clearly worried. "Let's go back, Caleb. It's not safe to continue," he said, and I readily agreed. Upon returning, the tension in the house was palpable. My online horror stories now seemed like child's play. I didn't tell James about the creature, but he could sense that something was wrong. Max wouldn't leave our side, as if he wanted to protect the family. That night, we locked ourselves in early, hoping the nightmare wouldn't repeat itself. Little did we know that this was just the beginning of our scary adventure. The following day dawned with a heavy aura, and everyone in the house seemed to feel it. I tried to forget what I had seen, but the memory of that creature's eyes haunted me. The ghost stories and scary tales I read online seemed to come alive in my mind. My father decided that we should keep a vigilant eye and avoid going out at night until we understood what was going on. However, that night something compelled us to leave the house again. Max started barking, but this time it wasn't a warning bark, it was a bark of desperation. We ran to the door, and when we opened it, we saw Max running towards the forest, barking furiously. My father, armed with a flashlight and an old shotgun, decided to follow him. Insisting on joining him, I was allowed to accompany him while my mother and James stayed inside. We entered the forest, following Max's barks. The air was thick, and each step seemed to amplify the sound in the darkness. My father's flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead. Suddenly, the bark ceased. Everything went eerily silent. My father and I stopped, breathless, trying to listen for any sound that would indicate Max's location. Then we heard a low growl followed by a sound resembling a human moan. We ran towards the sound, and when we reached a small clearing, we saw something that made our blood run cold. Max was standing there, growling, his fur bristling, staring at the creature from the previous night. It was there in the middle of the clearing, watching us with those penetrating human eyes. Its skinny, hairless body reflected the flashlight's beam, making the scene even more surreal and terrifying. My father raised the shotgun but hesitated. The creature didn't seem afraid of us. "Stay behind me, Caleb," my father whispered, his eyes fixed on the creature. I obeyed, trying to stay calm. Max inched forward, still growling but not attacking. The creature watched us, as if studying our every move. Then, suddenly, it let out a guttural sound and ran towards us. My father fired the shotgun, the sound echoing through the night, but the creature dodged with impossible agility. Everything happened so fast that I could barely keep up. The creature jumped over us, but Max lunged at it, intercepting it. They rolled on the ground, fighting fiercely. I screamed for my father, who tried to reload the shotgun. The fight between Max and the creature seemed to last an eternity. But then, with one final growl, Max managed to push it away, sending it fleeing back into the forest. We were breathless, and my heart was racing. Max returned to our side, injured but alive. My father lowered the shotgun and pulled me into a tight embrace. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice trembling. We hurried back home, relieved to be away from that nightmare. We knew that creature was still out there, but for now, we were safe. We returned home with Max, who was hurt but seemed to be recovering. The tension in the house was palpable, and none of us could forget what had happened. The best scary stories we had ever heard paled in comparison to the real terror we were experiencing. The fear of the unknown haunted us, and every sound seemed to announce the creature's return. That night, we all stayed in the living room, together, trying to find some safety in each other's company. My father reinforced the doors and windows, and Max lay near the fireplace, still on alert. My mother, who had always been skeptical about online horror stories and paranormal events, was visibly shaken. She kept James close to her, as if proximity could protect him from any harm. A few hours passed, and the silence was broken only by the crackling of the firewood in the fireplace. Then, without warning, my father's flashlight flickered and went out. We were plunged into darkness, with only the fire's light to guide us. My heart raced, and I could feel the fear of those around me. My father tried to calm us down, but the nervousness was evident in his voice. Suddenly, we heard a sound from outside. It was a scratching noise, much louder and closer than before. Max immediately stood up, growling. My father grabbed the shotgun and walked to the door, gesturing for us to remain silent. He slowly opened the door, shotgun ready, and we followed him, trying to make as little noise as possible. Max was the first one out, cautiously sniffing the air. When we reached the backyard, we saw the creature again, standing at the edge of the forest, as if it had been waiting for us. My father raised the shotgun, but this time, before he could pull the trigger, the creature did something unexpected. It stood up on its hind legs, like a human. Its eyes held a pleading expression as it stared at us. My father lowered the shotgun, confused. The creature took a step forward, but Max growled, making it stop. We stood there, at an impasse, trying to understand what was happening. Then, the creature raised one of its front paws, revealing a deep wound. In that moment, we realized that this was not just a wild animal, but something or someone who was suffering. Not knowing what else to do, my father decided not to shoot. We slowly backed away into the house, keeping our eyes on the creature. It watched us until we entered and closed the door. That encounter had changed something within us. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown, but a new understanding that sometimes the scary stories we hear or read can have a depth we don't comprehend at first glance. The next morning, the creature was gone, leaving only the footprints and the memory of an inexplicable encounter. Life went on, but that night remained etched in our memories as one of the most intense, scary tales we had ever lived through. We learned to cope with fear and uncertainty, but above all, we learned that true terror often lies in what we cannot fully understand. That experience marked us forever, and whenever we hear online horror stories or ghost tales, we remember that night and the mystery surrounding it. And although we never discovered what that creature truly was, its memory persists as a symbol of the inexplicable mysteries that life can present. The cold night air seeped through the slightly open window of my car as I drove home after another exhausting shift at the pizzeria. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m., and the deserted streets seemed even gloomier under the dim light of the sparsely placed street lamps. My name is Jared, and I never imagined that this ordinary work night would turn into the most terrifying experience of my life. The familiar road wound its way past the orchard on the left, enclosed by a rusty wire fence, and the solitary house on the right, its dark windows seeming to watch me. The silence was broken only by the low hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of tires on small stones in the asphalt. As I climbed the hill, a chill ran down my spine, as if something was about to happen, and then I saw it. Something emerged from the shadows of the orchard, moving with an unnatural agility. My heart raced as the creature took 2 strides towards the yellow center line of the road. In the faint light of my headlights, I could make out its grotesque form. It was tall, maybe around 8 feet, with a grayish skin that seemed stretched over a skeletal body. Its protruding ribs contrasted with its extreme thinness, giving it a cadaverous appearance, but it was its eyes that paralyzed me with terror. Large, oblique, and as black as the darkest night, they seemed to absorb all the light around them. Pointed ears and clawed hands completed the image of a nightmare come to life. In the blink of an eye, the creature vanished, leaving me panting and trembling at the wheel. I slammed on the brakes so hard that the car skidded to a stop in the middle of the road. My whole body was shaking, and I could feel cold sweat trickling down my back. I frantically scanned the surroundings, searching for any sign of that terrible apparition, but found only the silent darkness of the night. With my heart still pounding, I shifted into gear and sped towards home, glancing nervously over my shoulder every few seconds. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The asphalt blurred as I drove faster, ignoring all speed limits. Every shadow along the roadside seemed to move, and every engine noise sounded like a distant scream. My mind spun, trying to process what I had just seen. Could it be possible that this creature was real? Or was I simply exhausted after a long shift, my imagination playing cruel tricks? Upon reaching home, I practically jumped out of the car, locking it with trembling hands. The street was deserted, but I felt as if 1,000 eyes were watching me from the shadows. I ran to the front door, struggling with the keys for a few agonizing seconds before finally managing to open it. Once inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, panting. My roommate Evelyn was sitting on the couch, watching a horror movie on TV. She looked at me, surprised by my abrupt entrance. "Jared, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," she commented, pausing the movie. I wanted to laugh at the irony of her choice of words, but the sound caught in my throat. "Ev," I started, my voice faltering. "You won't believe what just happened." The words poured out of me like a torrent. I told her about the creature on the road, describing every horrifying detail I had witnessed. As I spoke, I realized how absurd the story sounded. It was as if I were narrating one of those scary stories people share online. Except this was real. I had lived it. Evelyn listened silently, her face a mix of concern and skepticism. When I finished, she stood up and placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Jared, you've been working late every night this week. Maybe the exhaustion is affecting your perception. Why don't you take a hot shower and try to get some rest?" I wanted to protest, to insist that what I saw was real, but the look in her eyes made me hesitate. She truly believed I was imagining things. Reluctantly, I followed Evelyn's advice and headed for a shower. The hot water eased some of the tension in my muscles, but it couldn't wash away the terrifying images that persisted in my mind. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I noticed Evelyn hunched over her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey, Jared," she called, her voice tense. "I think you should see this." I approached cautiously, still trembling slightly. On the screen, I saw an online forum dedicated to accounts of paranormal experiences and scary stories from the internet. Evelyn had opened a specific thread, and my heart nearly stopped when I read the title, "Strange Creature Spotted on Oakville Road." With trembling hands, I grabbed the mouse and started scrolling through the page. There were dozens of reports, all describing encounters similar to mine. People talked about a tall, thin creature with grayish skin and black eyes, mostly spotted at night near the orchard-lined road. Some posts dated back months, while others were just a few days old. This is impossible," I murmured, feeling a chill down my spine. "How can there be so many people who've seen the same thing?" Evelyn bit her lip, clearly disturbed. "I don't know, Jared, but it seems you're not alone in this experience." We continued reading, absorbing every detail of the accounts. One particular post caught my attention. A user named Lunamoth47 described an encounter almost identical to mine, which had taken place just 3 nights ago. She mentioned the same stretch of road, the same terrifying creature vanishing in the blink of an eye. "We need to investigate this further," I declared, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Evelyn looked at me with concern. "Are you sure? This seems dangerous, Jared." I nodded, resolute. "I need to know the truth, Ev. I can't just ignore what happened." We spent the next few hours immersed in research, seeking any information that could explain the sightings. We uncovered local legends about strange creatures in the orchard, accounts of mysterious disappearances over the years, and theories ranging from secret government experiments to visitors from other worlds. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, Evelyn and I exchanged weary glances, yet resolute. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. I looked out the window, towards the road where it all began. "Now," I replied, "we uncover the truth." The following day passed in an anxious blur of preparation. Evelyn and I decided to return to the road that night, equipped with a video camera and powerful flashlights. As the sun set, my stomach clenched with a mix of fear and anticipation. We arrived at the location around 10:30 p.m., parking on the shoulder near the orchard. The night silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. Evelyn turned on the camera while I swept the area with the flashlight, my heart hammering in my chest. "Jared, look," Evelyn whispered suddenly, pointing towards something near the orchard fence. I turned the flashlight in that direction and froze. There, partially hidden behind a tree, stood a tall, thin figure. For a moment, I thought it was the creature. But then I noticed something odd. We cautiously approached, Evelyn filming as we went. When we got close enough, I let out an exclamation of surprise. It wasn't a supernatural creature, but rather an elaborate setup made of branches, fabric, and what appeared to be a latex mask. Is this a hoax? I murmured, incredulous. Evelyn filmed every detail of the structure. As we examined it, we heard a noise coming from the nearby bushes. We turned towards the sound, our flashlights illuminating a middle-aged man trying to sneak away. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" I shouted. The man froze, then slowly turned to face us, his hands raised in surrender. "Please don't hurt me," he pleaded, his voice shaking. In the following minutes, the man, who identified himself as Walter, confessed everything. He was the owner of the orchard, and he had created the fake creature as part of an elaborate plan to attract tourists and save his struggling business. Using illusionist tricks and the cover of night, he made the creature appear and disappear quickly, scaring passing drivers. I just wanted to save my property," Walter sobbed, sounding genuinely remorseful. "I never meant to hurt anyone. I thought that if I created a local legend, people would come to visit the orchard." Evelyn and I stared at each other, still processing this revelation. On one hand, I felt relief that there was no supernatural creature. On the other hand, a part of me was disappointed by the mundane explanation. We decided not to call the police, but we made Walter promise to end his scheme immediately. As we drove back home, Evelyn and I discussed what had transpired. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "this shows that those scary stories we read online aren't always what they seem." I nodded, reflecting on the experience. That's true. But it also shows how fear can make us see things that aren't really there. I glanced out the window at the now familiar road, much less frightening. I guess I learned an important lesson about not letting fear and imagination get the better of me. We arrived home exhausted but with a sense of closure. As I prepared for bed, I thought about all the people who had shared their experiences online. I wondered how many other mysterious creatures out there had equally mundane explanations. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in days, free from the fear that had haunted me. The lonely road held its secrets, but now I knew that not all mysteries are supernatural. Sometimes, reality can be as fascinating as any horror story. My name is Haley, and I never imagined that an ordinary night would turn into one of the scariest stories of my life. One that would become a tale for the internet. It all started on a typical Friday, after a long day at work. I arrived home exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open as I prepared for bed. The apartment was quiet as usual. My boyfriend Jace was away on business trips, so I had the place to myself. Usually I enjoyed these moments of solitude, but that night something felt different. There was a strange atmosphere in the air, as if someone was watching me. I ignored the feeling, attributing it to my tiredness. After a quick shower, I slipped into my favorite pajamas and fell into bed. The soft mattress enveloped me, and soon I found myself sinking into a deep sleep. I don't know how much time had passed when I felt something soft touching my hair. At first it was gentle, almost comforting. Half asleep, I smiled, thinking that Jace had returned early and was caressing my hair. He often did that, and I loved it. But then, the touch changed. What was once gentle became aggressive. I felt my head being pushed down into the pillow with increasing force. My heart raced, and a chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong. Very wrong. My eyes snapped open, panic taking over me. The darkness of the room seemed denser than usual, as if it were alive. With my heart hammering in my chest, I turned abruptly. That's when I saw him. A male figure was sneaking towards my closet. The faint light coming through the window revealed one detail that will forever be etched in my memory. A smile. It wasn't a common smile, but something distorted, almost inhuman. It was a smile that exuded malevolence. I froze for a moment, my brain struggling to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare, one of those scary stories we read online. But the pain in my scalp, where the intruder's fingers had gripped my hair moments ago, was very real. In a surge of adrenaline, I jumped out of bed. My feet barely touched the ground as I ran out of the room, rushing down the stairs. I didn't look back, fearing to see that smile chasing me. Reaching the kitchen, I grabbed the first thing I saw, a kitchen knife. The cold metal in my hand gave me a false sense of security, with my heart still racing and my breath coming in gasps. I forced myself to return to the bedroom. I needed to face this, needed to be sure. Climbing the stairs, each step echoed in my ears like thunder. The knife trembled in my sweaty hand as I approached the bedroom. The hallway seemed endless, stretching out like in a nightmare. Finally, I reached the bedroom door. I hesitated for a moment, remembering that terrifying smile. I took a deep breath, gathering all the courage I could muster, and pushed the door open. The room was exactly as I had left it. The messy bed, the curtains swaying gently in the night breeze. There was no sign of the intruder. I searched every corner, looked under the bed, behind the curtains. Nothing. It was when I approached the closet that I noticed it. A smell. It wasn't the familiar scent of my clothes or cleaning products. It was nauseating, a mixture of rancid sweat and something I couldn't identify. The kind of odor you would associate with online horror stories. The ones that make your stomach churn. With my hand shaking, I grasped the closet doorknob. The metal was cold against my skin. I counted to 3 in my mind and swung the door open, knife at the ready. The closet was empty. Hanging clothes, lined up shoes, everything in its place. But the smell, it was stronger than ever. It was as if it had permeated every fiber of fabric, every inch of space. I recoiled, confused and terrified. My mind spun, trying to find a logical explanation for what had happened. Had it been just a vivid dream, a hallucination brought on by stress? But the smell was too real. The sensation of the aggressive fingers and my hair still throbbing in my scalp. With trembling legs, I sat on the edge of the bed, the knife still clutched in my hand. The clock on the bedside table read 3:27 a.m. The silence of the night seemed to mock me, as if it held a secret I couldn't decipher. I picked up my phone and, with shaking fingers, started typing a message to Jace. I stopped. What could I say? That a stranger with a scary smile had broken into our bedroom and then vanished without a trace, leaving only an inexplicable smell? It sounded like one of those scary internet stories that no one believes are real. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't stay there waiting for the intruder to return. With my heart still pounding, I packed a quick bag, grabbed the car keys, and left the apartment. As I drove through the sleeping city towards my sister's house, I couldn't stop glancing at the rearview mirror, fearing to see that macabre smile following me. That night would become one of the creepiest experiences I would ever have. A constant reminder that sometimes the scariest nightmares happen when we're wide awake. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.